Hello and welcome to English Literature with Susan. Today I want to talk about the Victorian Age. I would follow a brief introduction to the period, how Queen Victoria became the Queen of England, and then I will go through to the characteristics of the literature of the age and the historical divisions made among literary products. The Victorian age, based on some conventions, is supposed to have been started on 1830s and it has ended on 1901. About 1830, it is the year in which King William IV became the King of England. Just let's have a look back in the kings of England. George the First was the one who was the son of the Electress of Hanover, and so one of the people who chosen previously, before the death of Queen Anne to be the King of England. He's the first of the Hanover or the House of Hanover, and then he was replaced by his son after his death, George II, and then after the death of George II, George III became the King of England. And you see that they were not so much creative with the names. By the way, King George III suffered from something like dementia, and at the final years of his reign, he couldn't, rule as a prudent monarch, so he was replaced by the Prince Regent. So King George III was officially the King of England, but his son controlled the country and the government. His son is now famous as the Prince Regent. And then in 1820, when King George III finally died, that Prince Regent became the King of England as George IV, another George. So for consecutive Georges, King George and his sisters and brothers were very pleasure-seeking people, and it was difficult for them to actually bring to life legitimate heirs for the throne of England. By the way, King George the Fourth died in 1830, and his brother King William the Fourth became the legitimate king of England. And the problem was that King George the Fourth didn't have any legitimate children surviving. So, his brother became the king, if this is the question. He didn't have any legitimate heirs. And King William IV was the King of England from 1830 to 1837. And when he died, because also, there was a kind of lack of legitimate children, Queen Victoria became the Queen of England, who was his niece. Queen Victoria's father had died earlier when she was a little child, and she became the Queen of England without any rivals or without any issues. So she was the only one. Victoria, therefore, at the age of 18, and in 1837 became the Queen of England, and she was the monarch till 1901, the time of his death, and also the ending of the Victorian age. And there is, of course, a reason that we call this period the Victorian era, and it is known by the name of a monarch, like the period of Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth I. The main reason is that the age got its spirit and its temper from the very character of Queen Victoria and her family. So when we say the Victorian temper, we really mean that Queen Victoria was there. Sometimes she's famous as the bourgeois queen. She was the queen whose life, whose photos were just available to everyone. So for the first time in the history of England, a monarch's life was just broadcasted by the means possible in those days. And the people tried to follow her, tried to be like her. So she was like a role model. and her life, the things she used in her life, the items in her life, her husband and their relationship, all of them were just followed as an example by the people of England. Queen Victoria's rule, which started from 1837 and finished on 1901, has some peculiar characteristics. So, when we talk about Victorian age, we talk about how Victoria had also constructed the social structure of England, how her presence is as a crucial one for the English nation in general. First of all, because Queen Victoria had almost a very long rule, she was the messenger of some political stability, and there was no changes of kings and queens, so she was just the only one in there. Because of her presence as a pillar in the English society, in the political scene of England, we can see many changes happening socially and politically. For example, the rule for divorce, for example, divorce was not possible before Victoria's time, so the law of divorce was actually issued on 1857 at the time of Queen Victoria. Or we have the second reform bill, which made possible for a greater majority of men to take part in uh, the elections, or which it actually made education universal for the English children. So these are some of the results of the political stability directly related to the figure of Queen Victoria. And the other issue is the strict cultural norms. We can say that this one, political stability, is kind of influencing that one, strict cultural norms. Because when everything is stable, people start to develop norms. And these cultural norms were sometimes very restrictive, especially for women. There were many guidebooks, how to behave in public, how to do this, how to do that, how to wear these things, that things, what is the etiquette, for example, for this occasion, how a woman should wear her dresses, and many things like that. And for example, if we want to talk about marriage and the rules of marriage, women, even if they were engaged to a man, had to be chaperoned. It means that if you want to go out with that man, or if you're going to spend some time with that man in a room, some other people, especially two or one or two more women, should be there present. Therefore, you would not be alone. So, being chaperoned, being controlled is kind of part of that strict cultural norm, or as one of its examples. By the way, the rules imposed in family, the control check on the families, didn't end up in somewhere pleasant and positive. The problem was that when you put some strict rules and norms in the society, people start to find the tools for that. They start to find ways to just do whatever pleases them without making or letting others know. So hypocrisy is one of the results of such kind of putting norms for the members of the society, especially for the middle upper classes, who were supposed to follow. Many of them, we have the notion of fallen woman, for example, or many other check marks for a good citizen at the time, especially in the society of the bourgeois or upper classes. At the time, Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventure in Wonderland is a reaction to this. For example, it shows how didactic literature at the time, how all that education and teachings were awful for children, and they seek a way out even into an abnormal world. Or if we read the plays, the social plays written by Oscar Wilde, for example, the importance of being earnest shows that nobody is earnest in that society. Honesty is a code, but nobody follows it. So morality or strict rules, setting strict rules related to morality would end up in immorality. The other um, actually issue related to Queen Victoria's reign is the expansion of the British Empire. British Empire had actually expanded to a good extent at the time of King George III, though at his time the British Empire lost a big part of it, which was America. But anyway, there were compensations for that. At the time of Queen Victoria, three big, particles of land were added up to England. The majority of Canada, for example, we have the Victoria Island even today, or a good amount of the African continent and also New Zealand were attached to the British Empire, therefore expanding it. It is a high time for British colonialism, we can say, and also consumerism. When you're living in a society in which there are many items, many materials, and people are trying to show off things to one another, uh, buying things, goods, dresses becomes a part of life, a big part of life, an essential one. So to just you know uh, finding those requirements of life, or those things which were considered to be necessities, to provide for them, you have to buy items, you have to buy things. And Victorian houses had famously parlors, and when you entered those parlors, for example, you encountered many paintings, many luxurious items and things like that. So when you entered a Victorian house, you were just exposed to everything that the host would wish you to see. And about Queen Victoria and her family. And Queen Victoria's marriage has a quite interesting story behind it. Victoria kind of had inherited that passionate life, or that pleasure-seeking life of her uncles and aunts. So she was like them, but she was very lucky. She became the queen at the age of 18. She was very young, and she started a kind of give and take, or it was just spending time, but spending time with equality with her prime minister, Lord Melbourne. And people started to just make uh, some rumors about their relationship. And especially, it was a time in which evangelists wanted to make English society more religious. They wanted to preach religion to people, to take religious belief back. So those evangelists were especially checking Queen Victoria. That's why Queen Victoria's councils just helped her to find a way out of this condition, out of those rumors. She invited one of her German cousins, Prince Albert, to England. Prince Albert was Queen Victoria's cousin, but they were not each other's equal. Queen Victoria was always, part of that high society royal family. But Prince Albert's family were kind of isolated in Germany, and he was not, Victoria's match in the sense of their social status, though both of them were prince and princesses. By the way, Prince Albert arrived on London, and it was a kind of love at first sight. And Queen Victoria really passionately fell in love with that man. In her diaries, she's written that Albert is beautiful, for example, and she had praised him. It took about 4 days, so that Victoria decided to propose to Prince Albert. Prince Albert could not propose because Queen Victoria had the highest rank in the hierarchical system of the court. So Prince Albert was exposed or was supposed to listen to her proposal, and he accepted, and they kissed immediately, and it was her first kiss. And Queen Victoria was passionate and very essential, like his uncles and aunts, but she was lucky to find a legitimate outlet for all those emotions and passions. And just you can see in this painting, there is a touch to be here. uh, and the direction of Albert's look is just Queen Victoria. One of the drawbacks maybe of this passionate and sensual life with Prince Albert was pregnancy. Queen Victoria got pregnant 9 times. And she became mother for 9 times. And at first, she felt exhausted by that, but later on, she could understand that her children are kind of political bargain for her. The Victorian society was looking at her and her family, and she had that ideal family. She was in love with her husband. Her husband was in love with her. They were perfect matches, and they were everything, which is a representative and embodiment of a happy family. And they are like those good students in a class that everyone's parents just pushes their children to be like her and her family. So the Victorian society was ravaging itself and kind of ravishing itself to become like her. And sometimes it was not possible in reality for the other people because they had no freedom like her. They didn't were sponsored. They were not sponsored by her. So like her. So it was not a kind of maybe a good comparison, but the people compared themselves to Queen Victoria. Um, Prince Albert, especially, and Queen Victoria also represent morality. Morality is one of the codes through which we can define their family life. Prince Albert, especially, uh, was always following the codes of morality, and for him, morality was not a relative kind of idea. So morality was morality to him, and other people tried to follow him. And what was the epitome of immorality? Lord Byron. Lord Byron, the representative romantic figure, romantic poet, is now the bad man, and you have to avoid him. You have to avoid the immoral poems he has written, like Don John, Childe Harold Pilgrimage, his Oriental Tales. Everything he had written was considered to be immoral. Lord Byron was not immoral, and it was just the belief of the Victorians. It didn't match the moral cause, the strict moral cause of the Victorians. And yes, I'm just kind of an ardent fan of Lord Byron. So it was not maybe that much fair, but the Victorians considered him as the devil and or the Satan or the satanic kind of poetry had written, creating Byronic heroes who were essentially taken from Milton's Satan and Paradise Lost. Anyway, all those Satanism and Byron's poetry, all that straightforwardness, frankness in his poetry was not just, pleasant to the Victorians, and they tried to avoid him. And Thomas Carlyle famously stated that you have to close thy Byron and open thy Goethe. The reason for this maybe is that Goethe was one of the forefathers of Romanticism himself. But at the end of his life, he was overwhelmed by Romanticism, and has said that Romantic is kind of what is like morbid, and classicism is healthy. So Goethe, because of his conversion or because of this reversive idea, was considered as an icon, and Lord Byron as a bad model. And you can see Queen Victoria also in this picture. And many of these paintings and pictures were available, and people could see her, could see the items in her palaces. And well, In a similar vein, the other writers had expressed the same thing. The popular novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton has England and the English, written in 1833, made a similar judgment. When Byron passed away, he wrote, "We turn to the actual and practical career of life. We evoke from the morbid, the dreaming, the moonlight and dimness of the mind." He's referring to the romantic imagination, and by a natural reaction addressed ourselves to the active and daily objects which lay before us. So we can say the movement from Romanticism to the Victorian era is like the movement from internal to the external, from the individual to the society, from romanticism to realism, and that's all. And in this picture, you can see Lord Byron at his deathbed. He's dead, and Lord Byron was actually lame, and the painter here had just covered his problem. So he tries to show the perfection of the figure of Lord Byron, and Lord Byron died in Greece, and that's why you see this crown on his head. And another interesting item is put here, and that's the broken lyre. The Aeolian lyre was a romantic item. It represented imagination. So the lyre which made music was a metaphor for the poet which made poetry. And here you see the strings of the lyre are also cut. So by the death of Byron, we can say the Romantic movement had also fallen its end. And this was somehow, as you can see, celebrated by the Victorians. And you can also see Queen Victoria here. Queen Victoria is sometimes famous as the Mourning Queen. She lost her husband at the age of 40, 20 years after their marriage. Prince Albert died. On a series of occasions, one of them was that their son Bertie had an affair with a prostitute or something. So his heart was broken. He was taken away and had died. Queen Victoria was broken at first. She rejected the removal of the desk of Prince Albert, for example, which was set beside her desk. Or Queen Albert's picture was just put above the side he slept on their bed. And well, she couldn't sleep with his absence. She couldn't come into terms with his absence. So for the rest of her life, and many formal and official occasions, she appeared with black in black or with a black dress. So that's why many of her photos and paintings after the death of Prince Albert are like that. And she never married after him. She was loyal to his memory. And you can see a photo from Queen Victoria's marriage. Queen Victoria was the first bride who officially wore white for her marriage. And, she's even now an inspiring source for the brides, because even today we follow the same code of dress. Because the Victorian period is very long anyway, we can divide it into three phases. Early Victorian age, starting from 1830 to 48. This period is famously called the time of troubles because, Europe was torn apart by revolutions and wars, and generally the continent was the hotbed for revolutionary ideas, and the English government did everything to avoid that. But the people were hungry. The people, were not in a good economic condition. So it was very difficult to keep the country out of all those revolutionary movements. And the English successfully did that by making some reforms, or some big reforms actually. And we have the mid-Victorian age. This is the time of prosperity, the time many people want to go back to history and live in. It started in 1848 and it continued till 1870. In the late Victorian period, which is a, again a time of hopelessness, a time of decadence or fantasy, started from 1870, ended 1901. It's a kind of time of depression. Those high hopes and at the time of prosperity are kind of not pursued in this period. Once again, Prince Albert, Queen Victoria. And this is one of the earliest footages made out of London. And you can see this guy just very interested on the camera. Let's just follow the time of troubles, the early period. Uh, the economic distress was a major issue, and it was, if it was not controlled, it would end up in a revolution. One controlling factor here was the passage of the first Reform Bill in 1832. The first Reform Bill, you know, kind of checked and hold some of the drawbacks of the electoral system, and many representatives were just omitted. So the control and the power or empowering of some of the representatives of specific areas were just subtracted there or was decreased. The Reform Bill represents the beginning of a new age, therefore, in which the middle class economic interest gained increasing power. When the market was rather controlled, when the economy was somehow balanced, the middle classes started to raise. So they had the money, the current money. So they were just controlling the market, and this is the kind of the beginning of the circulation of the capitalist ideas in England. There's a time that Friedrich Engels was also, doing some research on the English people, and the Marxist theorists were coming along. And this is the text of the Reform Bill. About the literature produced at this time, there are some vivid records in the works of fiction by Charles Kingsley, who was a historian, a dramatist, and a poet. By Elizabeth Gaskell, The North and South is, for example, one such novel in which we see the main character, just travels to Manchester, and then she comes to the help and aid of those people who are just coming to the cities as immigrants, and all those issues and problems. Sorry. One contribution of Queen Victoria's oh, sorry. I'm sorry for the mishap. One contribution of Queen Victoria's age was actually urbanization. The modern cities were getting shape, but at first everything was so unruly. And during her reign, cities turned into organized or urbanized locations. And the third figure is Benjamin Disraeli. Disraeli later on became the Prime Minister of England, and he has written a novel with the title Sybil, but the novel subtitle is also important, The Two Nations. The Two Nations is a reference to the division between the upper classes and the lower classes in the English society, the possibilities and actually luxuries and what was available to the upper classes and the bourgeois class, and how the lower classes were living. The novel is also about the Chartist movement, and it is a kind of political novel in which a political social issue is just showed. The Chartists try to make some changes in the parliamentary laws. They wanted, for example, a universal suffrage, and they wanted invisible ballots and things like that. So it was about votes and parliaments, and such political issues are also dealt with in this novel. And Another early footage, Blondin. The paintings of the age also show this. Look, Fielders has painted this one, applicants for admission to a casual ward, and you see the people, the snow, the cold weather, and how the people are miserable here. And this is, it seems, an everyday event here. And just compare that to this one. This painting by John O'Brien is actually painted in mid-20th century, but it just represents that spirit of the age, at the Victorian time, how the upper classes were enjoying the pleasures of life, the complacencies were all available, and see how many items are here from different periods. And they like this one, these statues, these vases, the flowers everywhere, the paintings, these, golden parts on the wall. All of them show that complacent life enjoyed by these people compared to the people shown in the previous painting. And omnibuses were places in which different classes could mingle. Here you see, for example, three upper class women based on in their dresses. We can decide this, and this guy, and also we see this poor woman, and you see how colorful they are, how showy they are, how they are under light. But this woman is, no, in a shadow in the painting, and also this one shows some different groups of people. This woman is most probably working in a house, so she's a maid, servant, something, and she has both what is necessary for the food of that day, for the family for whom she works. And these two women seem to be upper classes, and this woman had bought a hat or something compared to this woman who doesn't even wear a hat, and she's bought some radishes, we can say, maybe. And what she has bought and what she has bought is kind of a comparison, and she's looking into a mirror, she's checking her appearance, and this other woman is miserable with a little child uh, at her hands. And this guy, uh, who cannot, I don't know on what ground, read his newspaper. It seems that the newspaper is empty, blank, or something. Well, this was my introduction to this part of Victorian period and the Victorian spirit of the age. And in the next videos, I will introduce the second and the third part of Victorian life and time in literature as well. Thank you for listening, and I will see you later.